Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 10 true disturbing stories about Appalachian back roads. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. Now, let's begin. I keep wanting to start this somewhere less pathetic than it actually began, but honesty is part of why I'm doing this. The night I found the post, I'd been up too long, hungry in that flat way where you don't even notice it anymore. The apartment was in its winter noises, radiator banging like someone's knocking from inside the wall, the fridge motor taking long naps and then jolting awake with a tired growl. My laptop ran hot in my lap, fan whining, the hinge tugging at the deep indent where it always sits. All the little ordinary sounds that used to feel like company had started to feel like a thin layer thrown over some deeper quiet. I was on my third circuit. Job sites, email, Craigslist, back to email to see who wasn't replying. The big places were sending their "we've moved forward with other candidates" notes, chirpily regretful, and Craigslist was the usual mix of vague gigs and obvious scams masquerading as urgent opportunities, with pay that didn't match the job. I was ready to close the tab when the title snagged me. Inventory audit, one night only, cash on completion. I've done inventory. Not glamorous, but it's a rhythm I understand. Count, scan, double check. Don't get lost in columns. The body knows what to do. The pay was a number that made my chest tighten, enough to cancel out the two pale envelopes on my counter with red windows. The hours were strange, 9:17 p.m. to 2:17 a.m. Exact, almost funny. The line under that read, "Ideal for a quiet, careful person comfortable with fluorescent environments." I know it sounds like I'm trying to make a point after the fact, but if you looked at my resu, if you saw what I wrote when I was trying to sell the least sellable parts of myself, you'd know why that phrasing ran a finger down my spine. I used that exact pairing once, quiet and careful, because I couldn't think of a better way to say, I won't get in the way and I won't mess up. The body of the ad didn't look like a scam. No emojis, no family-owned filler, no stolen stock photos. A list, clean, scan barcodes, verify quantities, note discrepancies, do not move pallets. Bring your own gloves, dress in layers, prefer applicants on the east side. Bus 54 runs late. That's my bus, the one I take when my car won't start and I don't want to ask anyone for a ride. Maybe it's nothing. Plenty of people take the 54. But I don't see bus lines mentioned much in these. It made the ad feel like a hand tapping my shoulder. I scrolled to the bottom. Reply with name, availability this week, and phone number. We move quickly if you're a match. The posting time said, posted 4 minutes ago, which always feels like you arrived at a table just as someone got up. I reread it twice and then a third time because I'm an overreader, because I look for the seam. I didn't find it, or I told myself I didn't. The apartment air had that stale cardboard smell it gets when you haven't opened the windows in a while. My fingers hovered above the keyboard and kept doing that dumb dance, type name, delete, type name again. Like if I wrote it wrong, the opportunity would go away. Like if I wrote it right, it would fix more than it realistically could. I told myself the same thing I always do before I press send. Be grown. It's a job. People reply to jobs. I replied. The first reply came before I could switch tabs. The subject line was inventory audit, receipt confirmed, and the body was 2 lines and a signature. Thanks for your interest. We'll move quickly. Expect a brief screen. Nadia, contracting coordinator. There was a phone number and a company name I didn't recognize, a bland, hyphenated thing that sounded half real and half placeholder. I copied it and opened a new tab to search, like I always do. The website was minimal. White page, a simple logo, a contact form that didn't submit when I tried it. That, I told myself, is normal. People put up sites just to look like something you can trust. Another email arrived while I was still convincing the first one that I wasn't spooked. Pre-screen, 2 minutes. It had a calm little paragraph that read like it had been translated twice. We excel with self-starters who follow instructions precisely. Please respond with YN to the below. 1. Comfortable working alone for 4 to 5 hours. 2. Comfortable in low-traffic industrial environments. 3. Comfortable not using personal devices during shift. 4. Able to read a short paragraph aloud for voice verification. That last part sat in my throat. Voice verification. I've had to do that for bank calls once when I locked myself out. The email framed it like a security measure, so their on-site system knew I was me. I didn't like the idea of my voice being a key to anything, but you can't not like things when the number dangling in front of you could reset your whole week. I typed Y, told myself I'd worry later, and hit send. Nadia responded like I was texting her from 2 blocks over. Great. You write clearly. We like that. Are you available tonight? 9:17 to 2:17. If yes, confirm name and last four digits of your phone. A calendar invite popped in while I was reading. I stared at the numbers in the invite like they might rearrange into something less immediate. My hands did something I've always hated. They made my decision before I thought it through. I typed my name and the four digits like they asked. There was an itch at the back of my neck, a sensation like standing under a vent. I sent it, watched the little paper plane go, and then I looked at the job posting again. Posted 3 minutes ago had become posted just now. It was such a small thing, I know, but the timestamp had clearly changed. Maybe the poster edited a typo. Maybe they bumped it. Maybe the site hiccuped. I refreshed, half expecting the title to be different. It wasn't. Another email arrived. Confirmed, you're a great fit, calm, thorough, and available. Expect coordinates and access instructions at 7:17 p.m. Please have gloves, a flashlight, and layers. Do not bring personal devices beyond the lot. You will be paid cash on completion. Enveloped. I read the word enveloped 5 times because it felt like a choice. People don't write like that, like they're thinking in containers. I called the number in the signature because I wanted to hear a human voice. It rang 3 times, then a recorded message clicked in, the kind that sounds like you've reached a voicemail someone set up without thinking anyone would actually call. Mailbox full. The beep came anyway. I hung up without leaving anything. Another tiny quiet in the apartment, a new one, settled like it had been sitting in the corner waiting for me to make a move. I wrote down the shift time on a sticky note, ridiculous gesture, like the email wasn't enough proof. The note looked too green in the kitchen light. I put it in my wallet anyway. Nadia's last email had a PS line. This posting will close once we've filled the slot. Please do not share. We move quickly. It takes as long as a breath to convince yourself quickly is the same as competent. It's not. It just T means they leave you no time to think. I shut the laptop and sat there with my hands splayed on it like I was trying to warm them on a dead stove. I hadn't been outside all day, and the room had the stale, patched blanket heat of a place warmed by a radiator that can't decide what it wants. The clock over the stove clicked to 6:02 and felt like it was saying something. I got up to drink water and realized every motion was a little jittery, not from caffeine because I'd given that up to save what's left of my stomach, but from committing to something you can't immediately take back. It made me remember the way I felt in high school the first time I stole my own car keys, like I was both the thief and the owner. I told myself the things you tell yourself when you're doing something that might be stupid. It's a real job. Plenty of warehouses are half abandoned and still alive in one corner with the light on and a person inside ticking boxes. Cash doesn't automatically mean scam. It can also mean they don't want to set up payroll for one night. Coordinates instead of an address is techie and annoying, but maybe it's a new place without a good map marker yet. What would a company site even say that would make me feel better? That they have inspirational quotes under their About page. I went back to the laptop and opened Craigslist again like a nervous habit. The listing was still there, but the position count now read 0 currently accepting, which I hadn't noticed before. Maybe it had always been there. Maybe I'd missed it. The timestamp flickered in a way I can't prove because I didn't screen capture it. Posted just now clicked to posted 1 hour ago while I stared. My stomach did that little foot on stairs skip. This is stupid, I thought. It's a glitch. Sites aren't haunted. People are haunted. I closed the tab. I texted Mara because she is the person I text when my brain is doing snakes. Got a one-night audit thing. Pays decent. Weirdly specific, though. They asked for a voice check. Is that a thing? The text bubble came up and then disappeared. For a minute, I watched the ellipses bloom and fade. When her answer finally came, it was a shrug in words. Sounds like a scam, but if it's legit, get me on whatever list that is. We'll share location when you go. I typed I will and didn't hit send because the part of my brain that keeps people from worrying is louder than my responsible part. 2 minutes later, I hit send anyway. I laid out gloves and the flashlight I use for the breaker box because the hall light in this building is theatrical. It flickers like it's practicing fainting. I found a clean long-sleeve shirt and decided I'd wear my jacket that looks like I know what I'm doing even when I don't. It's funny the little costumes we assemble. The role in my head had a prop. A clipboard. I don't own a clipboard. At 6:47, a new email slid into the corner of my screen while I was washing a cup. Subject line, closed. The body was empty. Just the word in the subject like someone had leaned on the keyboard and then hit send. I wiped my hands and sat back down and refreshed my inbox, expecting a second email with details. Nothing. I refreshed again. The kind of unease that doesn't look like anything to anyone else took a seat behind me and leaned its chin on the back of my chair. I opened the original posting one last time. It took a second to load, as if it was deciding whether or not to let me see it. When it finally came up, A thin gray bar at the top said, "This listing may be removed by author." Not had been. Maybe. I didn't like how that phrasing made the future feel already written. I hit the voice memos app on my phone without really deciding to, told myself it was just so I could remember the directions when they came so I could repeat them back if I needed to. The red line crept forward, and I listened to my own breath for a few seconds and hated the way it sounded like somebody who didn't get out much. I deleted the recording. Then I started another one because deleting something never makes me feel better. "Okay," I said into the phone, because I don't know how else to begin. If I'm doing this wrong, I want to at least say the part where it felt right. The fridge motor kicked on. A neighbor dragged a chair across their floor like a piece of chalk catching on concrete, and in the pause after that, a long one that had weight in it, I realized I was waiting for the 7:17 email like a person waits for a call back after saying something true. I checked the clock again and then stopped myself from checking it a third time. My hands smelled like the cheap soap my landlord supplies. Fake lemon that fades to something metallic. It's a small thing, but it's the smell that always takes me back to nights when I've decided something that changes the shape of a day. It smells like being certain in a way that only lasts until you step outside. I don't know what I thought would happen if the email didn't come on the dot. That would have been the clean out. But 7:17 arrived like it had always been on its way. My phone lit the room in a blue square, and Nadia kept her promise. Coordinates. A time. A set of words that started acting like instructions even before I read them. I'm telling you this because that's when the job crossed over from idea to route. That's when I started rewiring my fear into steps. That's when "we move quickly" began to feel less like efficiency and more like pressure on a bruise. The 7:17 email was polite to the point of being bland. Subject: Access plus pre-shift. The body had 2 sentences and a button. "Please complete onboarding steps within 20 minutes to secure your slot. Thank you for moving quickly." The button said, "Open portal." I hovered over it because I always do to see where it leads. The URL was a long string, no obvious company domain, just a cloud host with an ID like a product code. It didn't feel like a trap. It felt like something someone built in a hurry and then decided never to revisit. The portal opened to a white page with a soft gray progress bar and a ticking timer in the corner that started at 19:59. I'm not a lab rat, but putting a clock on a task rearranges your brain. The first screen: confirm personal details. My name, the last 4 digits, my email. Under that was a checkbox. I will arrive at 21:17, local. In parentheses, we use 24-hour time internally. It made me think of places where the day is carved into shifts and you sleep when the lights tell you to. I checked the box, not because I agreed with the lights, but because I had to. Step 2. Voice verification. A little audio icon pulsed, and a sentence waited underneath it. "We ask you to read the following paragraph to calibrate our on-site recognition for shift operations. Please allow mic access." I stared at the word recognition. I can't explain why that word felt like a coat hung on the wrong hook. The paragraph itself was both harmless and oddly precise. My name is name. At the time of recording, the date is auto-filled and the local time is auto-filled. I am verifying my presence and willingness to complete the assigned inventory audit with care and accuracy. If anyone asks, I will say, "Inventory audit in progress." I understand that all calls are recorded for quality and safety. The time auto-filled and blinked like a cursor breathing. I almost laughed because it sounded like something out of a customer service script that wandered into a warehouse. But I'd already told them the part of me that they wanted, quiet and careful. I clicked Allow Microphone. The laptop made that little hollow pop it makes when it switches microphones. The portal sent a soft chime through the speakers, like a meditation app. "Begin reading in 3, 2, I read. My voice in my own ears never sounds like I think it does. More breath, less body. And saying, "I will say, inventory audit in progress," pinched something in my face I didn't know could pinch. When I finished, the page spun for a long second that felt longer than it was. "Voice sample received," the screen finally said. "Confidence, match 1 of 1. I didn't like how that phrasing shrank me to a single coin flip. 1 of 1. It suggested no expectation of comparison, no world in which another voice would ever be expected. The timer in the corner ticked down to 15:12. Step 3. Non-disclosure conduct. That was the one that made me check the corners of the room like someone might be listening. It was a PDF embedded right in the page with black bars where names should be. a header that read subcontractor acknowledgement, and then this document establishes your duty of quiet. Facility names are withheld from public-facing materials. Duty of quiet. I scrolled and the document scrolled with me, but there were places where the black bars had been drawn imperfectly and you could see the tops of letters peeking out like the edge of a photograph. S and R up in the corner. A fragment of a word that could be logistics or longines or anything with a long spine and a curve. Checkboxes waited at the bottom like little gates you had to pass through. I will not introduce personal devices into controlled areas. I will comply with time-precise instructions. I will not discuss shift specifics outside of operational channels. I checked them one by one because that's what the portal wanted. When I clicked Submit, the next screen was a map thumbnail. Nothing around it, just a dot in a field of gray, and a button that said Reveal Coordinates at 2057. A lock icon next to it. The timer in the corner read 11:38. There was a line at the bottom that didn't fit anywhere else on the page. If door is not opened within 2 minutes of your scheduled arrival, wait 3 minutes, then knock 5 times. It sat there like a piece of tape that had caught on my sleeve. I turned the laptop a fraction just to tilt the angle of the light on the screen. My apartment reflected back at me, the dead plant I won't throw away, the dent in the couch, the sticky note in my wallet peeking out like a tongue. This was the part where a different version of me takes a screenshot, sends it to Mara, calls the number, and demands a human voice. This version of me watched the timer roll past 10 o'clock and told himself he'd done harder things than trust a box on a screen. The portal nudged me forward. Optional step, webcam verification for building access. The words optional and access sat too close together. Underneath, hold ID to camera to confirm age and likeness. Address and numbers may be obscured. They'd anticipated my instinct to cover the parts of a card that could be used like a spare key. I thumbed my ID out of my wallet and held it up. The camera clicked a picture in a way that felt physical. A thin green frame found my face and the ID and made the little confetti animation that every site uses now to pretend it's your birthday. Approved. I looked at the card in my hand. Sweat had put a pale fingerprint on the plastic. I rubbed it with the hem of my shirt like I could rub off the fact that I needed this. A small chat bubble opened in the lower right corner of the portal. Nadia is here if you have questions. It was a lie that looked like help. I typed, "What should I expect at the door?" I watched the 3 bouncing dots arrive. Pause, leave, return, like a small animal deciding whether to cross a street. "You'll be met by operations," she wrote. "If not immediately, follow printed instructions at entry." That phrasing is like when someone says, "You'll love it," before you taste something and your mouth starts bracing. Printed instructions at entry, like a treasure hunt designed by someone who hates the people playing. I asked about the bus because my car has an unpredictable sense of humor. "Is there a bus stop nearby?" Another pause, the dots tapping and retreating. The 54 stops 2 blocks south by the fencing supply. It was accurate and uncomfortably precise. I closed the chat without saying thanks and immediately felt rude for not saying thanks to a bubble. The portal chimed again, a different note this time. Calendar attached, downloaded packet, jobbrief.pdf. The file landed in my downloads folder with the same thunk that everything makes on this laptop. I opened it and let the fonts find themselves. 4 pages, clean. Page 1, scope. Page 2, workflow. Page 3, operational reminders. Page 4, emergency protocol. I scanned detail by detail, looking for a throwaway line that would tell me this was built by a human with an ordinary shape. It all felt like the opposite. Sanded, deliberate, no hand in it. Arrive precisely at 21:17. This is not arbitrary. The sentence refused to make eye contact with me. Do not bring personal devices beyond the lot. If you must, power down and place in locker. Locker was underlined. The next line insisted, no recording or photography of any kind. The next was a little stranger. Present ID if asked, otherwise remain task-focused. There was an instruction about a side door with a code. Side E, north face. Use code 3131. Wait for green. Then the line that made me itch because it felt like it had drifted in from the future. If approached by third parties during shift, respond calmly with inventory audit in progress and return to task. It's a phrase you could easily shrug off as corporate speak. Just something to say when someone from another department wanders in, but it read like a password being taught to a child. My eye kept getting pulled back to it like a tide. Emergency protocol wasn't much help. In case of alarm, await instructions. Do not self-evacuate unless directed. There was a small square with an icon of a person standing still and the kind of arrows that suggest motion while also instructing you not to move. I closed the PDF because looking at it felt like agreeing to it. I checked the Craigslist tab even though I'd already promised myself I wouldn't. The listing wasn't just closed, the page returned a little ghost note. This post has been deleted by its author. It's a sentence I've seen 1,000 times. A part of the Craigslist texture, but in that moment it slotted in wrong. The by its author felt like a person backing out a door and locking it from the other side. I refreshed. The page stayed gone, but the title still lived in my history, like a name you typed too fast. At 8:48, my phone vibrated against the table with a call from an unknown number. I stared at it while the screen blinked out pause. Sybil spam. I let it ring out, then played the voicemail because not playing the voicemail made me feel like I was choosing ignorance. There was no voice, just 2 seconds of room tone, and then what might have been the drag of something across a desk. I told myself a robocall had misfired. That's all. That's all. I printed the job brief even though I knew I wasn't supposed to bring paper inside. I wanted something I could fold and crease and pocket. The printer started up like a creature awakening. It hadn't printed in months, and the first page came out with a faint band where the ink was tired. I liked the imperfection. It meant the world still existed somewhere as an object. I packed with a deliberate slowness that made each item feel like a commitment. Gloves, flashlight, folded cap because the building would be fluorescent and cold. I paused over my phone. The instructions said not to bring personal devices inside. The version of me that obeys wanted to leave it charging on the kitchen counter. The version of me that has watched too many doors close in front of him slid it into my jacket pocket and told myself I'd power it down at the lot. The compromise felt like lying to both versions. I texted Mara the coordinates that were still locked on the portal. I'll send the actual pin when it unlocks. If I forget, yell at me. She hearted the message and then added, "Dude, I'm serious. Send it, and text home when you're home, not 2 days later." I told her I would. Then I typed, "This one has a weird script they want me to say to PPL." I hit backspace until the bubble was empty and then sent a thumbs up because sometimes we use emoji to avoid telling the truth. The email dinged again at 8:57. Coordinates unlocked. A little fanfare, nothing more than a shift in the font weight, but it might as well have been a door opening in the wall. The map zoomed into the G of town where the streets give up their names and revert to numbers. The pin sat like a push tack between two shapes that I recognized as the fenced lots you see from the freeway. No company name, no sign, just the shape of a building that had the wrong amount of shadow for its size. I copied the numbers and pasted them into my GPS, then stared at the route like it would tell me whether or not to go. 41 minutes by bus if I was timely, 21 by car if the car behaved. My stomach did that slow twist that doesn't have to be fear to be fear. I went back to Craigslist one last time like a person who picks at a scab and then has the gall to be surprised when it bleeds. The listing was gone, not just deleted, no cached copy, nothing scraped. The browser gave me a blank page with a small sentence at the top. Nothing found for this post. It's a tiny phrase, but it landed with more weight than it had any right to. I don't know if I'm good at reading intent in small things because I've had to be, or if I'm always seeing patterns where there aren't any, but my body filed that phrase under, "You're on your own." I tried to make a plan. If the door wasn't opened, I would wait exactly 3 minutes and then knock 5 times like a person in a story who believes in rules. If no one answered then, I would call Mara and say out loud that I was leaving. If a person met me at the door and said something that made me feel foolish, I would let that happen and take the cash and do the work and be grateful. If there was a locker for my phone, I would put my phone in it. I told myself these sentences like beads. It helped a little. Repetition is a cheap form of courage. On the way out, I stood in the doorway for a second with the lights off and listened to my apartment breathe. The radiator clicked a small declarative click. The hallway light outside my door was steady for once, not performing its intermittent fainting act. I put my ear to the door just because I could. Someone down the hall coughed and a TV murmured a laugh track a second too late. You can talk, you herself into a lot of things when the rest of the building sounds ordinary. I locked the deadbolt and jiggled the handle like I always do, then immediately unlocked it again to check the stove, then locked it again because if I died in a warehouse, I didn't want to also be the person who left a burner on. The night air on the stairwell had that damp metal smell that lives in old rails, and the wet stair treads the super mops once a day, whether they need it or not. My hands found the cold of the railing and the warmth of my phone in my pocket at the same time, and for a second, that was enough to make me believe in the simplest future. A bus ride, a door, a task with a beginning and an end. Then I remembered my voice on the portal, the phrase I'd said like it belonged to me, and I knew I wouldn't forget it even if I tried. Inventory audit in progress. I tasted the words against my teeth. They felt like a thing you say to the mirror to make the mirror stop answering back. I left with more time than I had and less nerve than I wanted. The bus would have cut it too close, and the thought of missing 917 by a minute because a driver took a long green at an empty intersection made my throat feel small, so I gambled on the car. The key turned with that wet cough it does when it wants me to know I owe it, then caught, and the engine settled into its tired hum. The heater breathed out the smell of old dust and hot plastic. I don't keep music on in the car anymore. I always used to fill silence with something, and now I catch myself wanting to hear every small sound like a person listening for a storm under their floorboards. The streets thinned the farther I drove east. Storefront light gave way to motion sensor security lamps, then to long bare runs of chain link that had been silver forever and learned to look tired about it. I watched the clock on the dashboard, always 2 minutes ahead, a choice I made on purpose and then started forgetting that I'd done, arguing with the phone in my pocket. 21:17 kept echoing in my head the way a song does when it doesn't deserve to. Not 21:15. Not 21:20. That kind of specificity feels like someone else deciding your stride. The GPS handed me off from highway to surface roads to shortcuts that weren't short, then told me to take a right where there were 2 rights stacked on top of each other like a joke. It zoomed in and the street names dissolved. Unnamed road, it said. Private access. The font got smaller and the outlines of buildings got larger, the way they do when you're driving through places designed for everything except pedestrians. I passed the bus stop they'd mentioned in the chat, the fencing supply sign wincing in the wind, 2 people huddled near it in reflective jackets that caught my headlights and abandoned them when I passed. The 54 rumbled into view in my mirror and then ghosted away. Behind me at the light. I wanted to pretend that meant anything. I talked quietly because I do that when I'm trying to convince my body I'm in control of it. Turn right then left, to no one. It's just a building. I said the phrase from the portal once under my breath and it tasted like something that had been in somebody else's mouth too long. Inventory audit in progress. The words sounded like they were trying to be polite and failing. The last turn came up without an intersection to justify it. The road lifted a little, then dipped, and my headlights washed over a flat expanse of asphalt broken by islands of weeds. The building waited beyond the lot like something painted on a scrim, too big and too featureless to be real until you parked in front of it. No logo, no sign, the kind of faceless frontage that expects trucks, not people. One bank of lights was on, a sodium smear that made the concrete look dirty even if it wasn't. My clock said 9:12, the phone said 9:10. I sat there with the engine running and picked which truth to believe. I killed the engine at 9:14 by the car's clock, 9:12 by the phone. The sudden quiet was loud. The building made a noise I'd forgotten buildings made. Air handlers, I guess, a long, steady exhale that you don't notice until you're close enough to hear the seams. I tucked my phone into my inner jacket pocket because I'd promised I'd turn it off at the lot. My thumb hovered over the power slider. It's strange how ceremonial that movement becomes when you've been told it matters. I slid it to off and watched the screen take its time going dark, like it was reluctant to leave me alone. In the pause after that, I decided I would walk to the door and not touch it until 9:17 exactly. It was such a small rule to obey. To give myself an anchor, I counted my steps across the lot. Somewhere in the distance, a truck downshifted and then didn't come any closer. Cold got under the edge of my jacket and threaded itself through my shirt. When I reached the door labeled in stenciled letters, Side E, I felt ridiculous for being early to a job that already felt like it wasn't sure it had hired me. The keypad waited beside the handle, black buttons with slick numbers worn smooth by other hands. I watched the minute tick and felt my body arranging itself around a decision it had already made. At 9:17 by the watch face I never wear, and the car clock that lies for me, I typed in 3131 and waited. A green LED blinked once, slow, as if considering me. Nothing moved, the handle didn't release. In that second between approval and access, I felt the stupid urge to apologize to a door. I tried the handle again, gentler, like it would appreciate the courtesy, still locked. There was something taped chest high next to the frame that I hadn't let myself look at until the minute allowed it. A manila envelope, flat, its flap tucked. A piece of blue painter's tape held it on. Careful, neat tear, like whoever placed it there understood that you don't leave residue on painted metal if you can help it. My name was written in block letters across the center. Not a stranger's guess at my name, a patient, even version of my name that looked like the way I write on forms when I want machines to like me. I stood there for an extra breath, long enough to feel the part of my brain that handles panic sort through three options. Someone knows me, handwriting converges to the mean under stress, I'm projecting, and choose the one that made the next motion possible. I peeled it free and opened it with the care you give to things you're pretending belong to you. Inside, a key card on a plain gray lanyard, a little yellow sticker on the plastic that said E only, a small composition notebook with a grid pattern, the kind you buy for a class you're not sure you'll pass, and a smaller brown envelope that was not sealed, with the word START written on it in the same block letters. Inside that envelope, cash. More than a first night float, less than the whole number from the ad. Crisp bills, the kind that stick to each other until you work them apart. The smell of them, a kind of clean that isn't, cotton and the faintest suggestion of hand sanitizer, rose up and got in my nose. I did not count it, because counting it would have made this feel like a transaction. A folded sheet of paper sat under the cash. "Welcome," it said, and the word didn't feel like it belonged to any mouth I know. "Use keycard at reader. Proceed to security to sign log. Do not bring personal devices beyond threshold. If delayed at entry, wait 3 minutes, then knock 5 times. If approached by third parties, respond with inventory audit in progress. Begin at station B, leave bag at loading 2. The font was sane. The paper was clean. The sentences were sturdy and hollow at the same time. That line again, the one from the portal, nested in the middle like it had always lived there. I slid the lanyard over my head and felt the keycard's rectangle find the spot on my chest where I'd noticed other people's tags hang in workplaces I visited but not belonged to. The reader was a little square tucked under the keypad, so flush against the doorframe that I'd missed it. I held the card to it, and this time the light turned green and stayed green. The handle flexed away from me like a tired joint. I pulled and the door opened on a gust of colder air and a widening rectangle of light. The vestibule had been stripped of everything except its function. 2 mats, commercial rubber with circles for catching dirt. A small table with a lockbox that had 3 open slots for phones. Above that, a sheet with the word locker and 3 digits. Under the word, 3 keys on hooks, each labeled with a number and a tiny color dot. I remembered myself promising to power down my phone and leave it in a locker, and felt the tiny stubbornness of the phone already defeated in my pocket. On the inner wall, there was a clipboard with a sign-in sheet and a pen leashed to it with a metal coil. The top of the sheet read, log. Under that, date and time. The minute fields were all doubles. 17, 47, 17 again. Like someone had decided time in this building moved in increments of 17 minutes and nothing else. 3 lines showed initials that didn't resolve into anything I could recognize, each paired with the time like a door code. I wrote my name, then the time, and had to stop myself from rounding to 17 just because everything else did. I wrote it anyway. If a place names the exact minute it wants you, it changes your muscle memory. The inner door was glass with wire mesh embedded in it, the kind you see in schools and hospitals and stairwells where someone had once wanted to be sure glass couldn't be broken fast. Beyond it, a hallway lit by the kind of fluorescent that makes color look like it's thinking of something else. I stood in the vestibule for a second longer than I needed to and practiced what it would feel like to be seen in that light. If anyone had met me at the door as promised, they were late in a way that didn't matter anymore. Crossing that threshold was smaller than I wanted it to be. I think I expected siren blare certainty, some sound or signal that would tell me I'd entered the part of the story where I was committed and could stop constantly checking my pockets. Instead, it was the soft mechanical sigh of a door that closes properly, and the pressure change that taps your ears when you move deeper into a building meant to be sealed. I hung the lanyard off one finger, then let it swing back against my chest, a small pendulum reassuring no one. Security was to the right, a door stenciled with letters that had been painted over twice. The smell in the hall was a mix of floor cleaner and the sweet rubber of forklift tires, with an undernote of dust that is not dust but skin and cardboard and old air. I stepped past a red line on the floor with white lettering that said clear path in a font that was more polite than bossy. The quiet wasn't absolute, nothing is, but it was curated. The distant hum of the building's body, a light flutter somewhere as if a vent had loosened a paper sign, a pop that could have been a bulb thinking about itself. I told myself these as facts so I wouldn't look for patterns in them. The security room had a glass rectangle with a pass-through and a door with a push bar that said, "Alarm will sound if opened." A bell above it the size of a dinner plate watched me with its blind eye. Another clipboard on a narrow shelf held a second log. Entry, exit. Notes. The left column had times beginning and ending in modern 17. The notes column held nothing but 2 short diagonal marks on 3 different lines, like someone had been tallying or testing a pen. Beneath the shelf, a small metal locker numbered 1 to 3 with keys that matched the ones in the vestibule. My phone felt heavier in my pocket, like it had learned a new density. I slid it out, shut it down again even though it was already off, and locked it in the locker with the smallest key. The sound of the lock catching felt final in the way a seatbelt click feels final on a flight you're not sure you want to take. There was a second manila envelope on the security shelf, thinner than the first, with the word brief in the same careful block printing. Inside, a floor plan photocopied so many times that the edges had lost patience. Aisles labeled A through G, stations marked like little islands, a cage labeled C7 underlined in pencil, a faint underline like whoever marked it wasn't sure if they meant to. I traced the path from Station B to the loading area with my finger and told myself that underline could be anything, someone's note to themselves. A smudge. The graphite of it came off on my fingertip as if it had been freshly underlined, which is absurd. It made my stomach make that small bird movement it makes when it wants me to stand up and leave. I rationalized. It's an after-hours operation. The envelope is a way to keep doors moving when you don't want to pay someone to sit there. Cash in envelopes is less paperwork and fewer arguments about hours on a one-night shift. The handwriting looks familiar because in a city of a million hands, half the block letters meet in the middle. The repetition of U17 is a quirk, a joke someone made one night to keep themselves awake. The words inventory audit in progress are a line they put in there to make people like me feel like we have a function when someone asks us what we're doing. I lined these thoughts up like cups on a counter and filled each one with a little water and drank from them in turn because it's a way to stay standing. On the wall, opposite the security window, a phone hung on a cradle. Not a smartphone, not a polite intercom. A phone with a heavy plastic receiver and a curly cord. A small strip of label maker tape above it read, "Out of service." The words were not centered. The tape had been peeled and placed back on at least once. I stared at it long enough that it started to feel like a dare. I looked away because, that's how dares work. They need you to disagree to exist. When I finally pushed through the inner door to the floor and the fluorescent light took me whole, I felt a rearrangement in the air. Not a shift I could point at. Something like the moment a stage manager calls half hour and everything backstage changes state. I thought of the envelope with my name written in my own patience and told myself that this is what competence looks like when you only encounter it in the dark. Then a faint buzz came from somewhere in the ceiling, a sound like a small speaker powering itself on, and went still again. I waited for it to repeat so I could decide whether to be afraid of it. It didn't, and the absence of repetition was worse than any pattern. Station B lived halfway down an aisle that had been painted so often you could see the ghosts of older lines bleeding through the red. The station itself was a square of metal desk bolted to the floor, a screen with a bezel so thick it felt self-conscious, and a barcode scanner tethered by a coiled cord like a dog that might bolt. Someone had wiped the surface with cleaner and then used the same rag on something greasy. The streaks shone under the fluorescence like wet fingerprints. 2 pallets sat in shrink wrap at a polite distance, their labels clean in a way that said they'd been moved here for show. I set the composition notebook beside the monitor and found a piece of tape on the desk, a brittle strip with the word "breathe" written on it in Sharpie. Old ink, graying, the ghost of someone else's small advice. Above the desk, a corkboard waited under a plastic sleeve. Inside the sleeve, Rules of Audit, Station B. The title had been hammered out on a typewriter or a typewriter's idea of itself. Inconsistent force, some letters sunk, others standing tall. Each rule had a small circle punched by a hole punch in the margin like someone once intended to clip them and carry them. Arrive at scheduled minute. Do not begin early or late. Sign security log. Return here promptly. Do not introduce personal devices. Locker for storage is provided. Use scanner to confirm. Do not move pallets. If intercom buzzes, respond clearly. Inventory audit in progress. Do not answer phone on wall. Do not enter cage C7. If printer issues you a directive, comply promptly and return to Station B. If approached by third parties, respond only with phrase and continue task. If you experience any discomfort, hydrate, adjust layers, continue task. There was something almost tender about the last one, like a mom's note slid into a lunch bag. Hydrate felt human. In a way the rest didn't. The rest read like the building was the one doing the hiring. The phone on the wall sat within eyeshot of the station, mounted at the end cap like a concession stand. Beige plastic, weighty receiver, curly cord. The out-of-service label stared back at me, not centered, edges grayed from being lifted and put back down. Above it, a square intercom grill was half-painted over the last time someone had hit the walls with a roller. A red LED nested in its corner, dead as a seed. I could feel myself rehearsing the phrase in my mouth without wanting to. Inventory audit in progress. My tongue didn't love the way the words stacked. I wiggled the mouse attached to the terminal and waited for it to come alive. It did, slowly, like an animal in winter emerging to check whether the world still existed. The login screen had no place for a password, just a badge tap icon and the word operator. Waiting. I pressed the keycard against the reader someone had glued to the monitor's base. A tone chimed, not unpleasant. The screen blinked to a beige app with black letters that made the whole thing feel 5 years out of date. Inventory mode, operator 1 of 1. My name sat in the corner under a tiny clock that read 2121. The 17 fetish didn't reach the system clock, apparently. I told myself that meant something. Someone competent built this, and then someone else layered superstition on top of it. Scanning is comfort when your brain is frayed. Paper, plastic, beep, count, confirm. I started with the top box on the nearest pallet. The scanner's tone was higher than I like, bright, like a small bird's particular call. The terminal registered the code with a little twist of text, line items lining up, confirming quantity on hand, quantity expected, discrepancy, 0. It felt like chewing gum to keep your jaw busy. For a few minutes it was just work. Thus. The air settled around me. I could almost pretend the rule sheet was a generic poster someone forgot to update after they merged departments. Then the clock in the corner of the screen rolled to 34, and I felt the back of my neck tighten like I just remembered I left water boiling. I looked up at the intercom that was only paint and a grid and told myself to sit back down inside the job. It doesn't matter when the lights think it is. It doesn't matter if a building believes in ritual. You count, you confirm, you get paid. The intercom made a sound that wasn't a buzz or a ring. 3 clicks, spaced in a way that made my chest follow them. A tick, tick, tick like a metronome someone was holding in their hand. I froze with the scanner half lifted. The red LED that had been a seed lit and held. A tiny unblinking eye. I waited for a human voice with human edges to pour out of the grill, and instead the air around my shoulders seemed to bend. My own breath sounded too loud in my ears. "My name," said the ceiling. It wasn't exactly robotic, but it wasn't conversational either. The syllables laid themselves down flat, each getting the same amount of love. The sound didn't come from a point, not the speaker, not the corner, not a person with a mouth. It came from the room like the room had pushed the word into being. This is the part where you say the phrase. The posted rules didn't have a space for bargaining. I swallowed and gave the words the same flatness they'd given me. Inventory audit in progress. A beat, then the 3 clicks again, softer. Acknowledged, the room said. A small printer under the desk, one I hadn't noticed. Thermal, the kind that prints receipts and shipping labels, woke up and spit out a thin strip. I pulled it and read. Operator recognized. Continue station B. Do not answer calls. Ops. I couldn't help it. I glanced at the phone. It was behaving itself. Receiver tucked in its cradle like a cat pretending sleep. The out-of-service label suddenly felt like a hat no one wanted to wear. I went back to scanning to prove something to myself. Box, beep, match, move. Another box. The pallet wrap whispered against itself, a plastic hush that can sound like voices if you let it. I didn't. I kept my eyes on the numbers. Quantity 10. 10 found. 0 variance. The intercom blinked again at 2151, as precise as a drip in a leaky sink. 3 clicks. The LED, then, my name. Not a question, never a question. I had my mouth around the phrase before my brain caught up. Inventory audit in progress. The thermal printer hiccuped and coughed another strip. Acknowledged. The word looked nothing like comfort typed in block caps. This time there was a second sound, fainter from down the aisle. The phone, the one labeled out of service, gave a single ring that cut itself off. Not a full ring. An inhale canceled. My hand tightened around the scanner. The rules were clear. Do not answer. Do not answer. The ring came again, this time shorter, a throat trying to decide if it wanted to speak. I stepped a millimeter closer to the station, like proximity to the rules could make me righteous. The third time, the ring didn't sound like a ring at all. It sounded like memory, like the exact timbre of the phone that hung in my mother's kitchen when I was 10, the one with a sticky 7 key, the one that rang with a swelling tone that never seemed to finish. I told myself I was being dramatic. The brain is a jukebox. It picks what it wants. I did not pick up. I kept scanning. The scanner's beeps felt defensive, like I was throwing pebbles at a dog. In my periphery, the cage labeled C7 sat in a dim square of its own air. Everything about it was boring by design. Welded wire panels, a chain through a lock, a paper tag zip-tied to the mesh with C7 stenciled in black. A low, battery-red LED winked deep inside the cage for a second and then steadied into nothing. Batteries bleed. Lights lie. I told myself this while keeping my eyes learning how not to look. My name, the intercom said again. It used my name like a tool. I could feel the syllables slotting into that stupid calibration paragraph I'd read at home, like the system was paging through it and selecting the parts it liked best. I gave it the phrase, and somewhere in the ceiling something buzzed to life, a square of noise like a transformer warming its hands. The printer stuttered. Proceed when directed, it wrote on a new strip. The wrong kind of calm. No direction followed. The phone stilled. C7 sat like furniture. I tried to outstill it. Scan, confirm, slide, scan, confirm, slide. The process worked until it didn't. The scanner rejected a code, beeped in a tone I hadn't heard from it yet. Lower, pained. The terminal produced a modal box that simply said, noted. Not what, not how. The clock in the corner rolled, and in the space where a minute should have been, my stomach did its small bird movement again, and then settled. The intercom went silent. Silence can be loud. My first impulse was to go looking for the person behind the noise. That came from a very old part of me, the part that wants to see a mouth shape the words that use my name so I can map intention onto a face. The rules said no, the floor line said no, the envelope cache said you already agreed to no. I tamped it down and instead checked the obvious, because obvious tasks are the little rocks you step on to cross a stream. I pulled the phone receiver gently free of its cradle and laid it flat on my palm without lifting it. Silence. Not even the dull, dead-air hum you get when a line is asleep. I set it back, guilty of touching it even that much. The out-of-service label lifted at one corner where someone's fingernail had tested it before. I pressed it down. A small, ridiculous part of my brain was sure a camera would see that gesture and check a box next to my name. Compliant. Back at the E station, I stacked the thermal printouts into the notebook. Operator recognized. Acknowledged. Proceed when directed. Little slips that reminded me of fortunes drawn from a machine that didn't care if you believed. If the job were a normal job, these would be the parts you tear off and throw away. I was saving them like evidence, like breadcrumbs, like a person who knows the end of the story before they know the middle. I tried to give the system every reason to be happy with me. Good posture, clean scans, no noise. I drank from the water fountain near the end cap and made a note that the water was colder than it needed to be and tasted faintly of old pipes. I stretched my fingers when they got tight. I made a point of never letting my steps cross the invisible boundary that would point my feet towards C7. The cage radiated a quiet wrongness that could easily be the power of suggestion. Someone underlined something on the photocopy. I saw the underline. My body took note. That's all. The intercom did not come back immediately, and somehow that was worse. It let the air fluff back up around everything and made me aware of how many noises I was filtering without realizing it. The whir of an exit sign's transformer, a distant vibration like a compressor, the soft swish of my own sleeve. When I placed the scanner down lightly, the coiled cord clicked against the desk in a rhythm that made me think of the 3 clicks that summoned the voice. I moved the cord so it wouldn't do that again. At 22:08, a funny time, neither 17 nor 34 nor 51, the phone rang once in the old kitchen tone and stopped. I flinched and then felt silly for flinching. If you asked me to explain why the ring made me think of home, I could build you a story about how every phone that rings like that is a sound your body spends a childhood learning, but it would be a lie. Some sounds just put a hand in the center of your chest and press. I stood there with my hand hovering over the scanner like a person about to pray and said, quiet, mostly for me, the stupid little phrase. Inventory audit in progress. The ceiling did not acknowledge this unprompted response. The printer did not produce anything. I put the scanner back on its cradle and let the plate of it clack. Rationalizations queue up neatly when you're tired. Night operators work by script. The intercom is automated. The clicks a pre-roll before recorded announcements. The phone line is cross-wired to some test loop that bleeds ring voltage at junk intervals. The do not enter C7 instruction is a boring OSHA thing, maybe floor damage or a busted latch. My name coming from the ceiling is as simple as reading a field and voicing it, the same way your banking app uses a machine voice and your delivery app calls you friend. I could put all that together into a perfectly reasonable argument and still not want to put my back to the cage. I caught myself glancing at the wall clock halfway down the aisle. one of those industrial clocks with a face like a plate, only to notice the second hand wasn't moving. Stuck at TO 17, it had to be a coincidence. If I'd seen it stuck at TO 12 or 49, I would have built a different superstition. Our brains are generous like that. I repositioned myself so the clock wasn't in my direct line of sight. When I lifted the composition book to slide another printed strip inside, an impression showed through on the next page, the way hard handwriting leaves a ghost for the page beneath. Not my block letters, not the typed rules. A short, slanted note, pressure fierce enough to emboss. The words were broken across the grid, partials I could make into a sentence if I wanted to. Don't and turco and swear. It duplicated the rule without saying it outright, like someone had been writing to themselves earlier, pressing so hard that their insistence bled into my now. I thought about leaving. It sat there. An option. Dull as salt. The door wasn't locked from the inside. The night wasn't barred. The cash in my pocket was enough to call the whole thing a win and build a story that made me brave for pulling out when it got weird. The counter-argument was terrible and stupid and familiar. I needed the rest of the money. That's the whole trap. You angle your decisions around the next digit and tell yourself it's survival, which is true, and you tell yourself it's rational, which is less true, and then you tell yourself you're being watched for competence, which is a lie you let walk around in your jacket so you don't feel alone. At 22:17 on the terminal clock, the click, click, click came again, and I felt my muscles prepare the phrase the way you prepare a breath before you dive. The voice used my name one more time but brought the syllables closer together, like it had fewer hands to carry them with. I answered, because that's the only job the job seemed to really require of me. The printer rolled, and this time the strip said something new. Proceed to security for further briefing. No please, no tone, just direction. I stood there for a moment, reading the words until they were just shapes, and understood that whatever this was, it wanted me trained, not hired. I slid the strip into the notebook, breathed, and tried not to count the steps to the door. The strip in my notebook told me to go to security like it was the most normal next step in the world. My legs didn't agree. The aisle looked longer on the way back, the fluorescent hum a little more needle-like. I kept my steps neat and counted them without meaning to. The security door was the same dull gray, the painted stenciling soft with age. The big bell above it watched me the way large, simple objects do when you're sure they have a job. There was a badge reader I hadn't noticed before, a little square half-inset into the jamb under the alarm will sound sign. I touched my keycard to it and felt my abdomen brace for a siren I couldn't afford to set off. Instead, a courteous click. I pushed in. The door breathed shut behind me, and the room took me in with that old machine smell. Dust warmed by vents, the ghost of coffee that went cold last Thursday, the bite of electronics that have been on too long. The monitor wall, 8 screens and a lattice, glowed the sick blue of office night. Some feeds were crisp, some soft as if there were a thin film of grease on the lens, some a little snow-shivery. Timestamps marched along the bottom of each frame, tiny LED numerals that should have offered comfort. They didn't match. One said 21:58, one said 22:02. One had no timestamp at all, just a blinking colon. The top left showed an angle on Station B that made my mouth go dry, me from above and a little behind, the camera tucked somewhere in the ceiling where I hadn't thought to look. I watched myself stand there, focused, scanning, the small arch in my back that older chairs gave me, and felt a little rush of shame, like being caught unpracticed in a window. I raised my hand in the security room to see what the camera would do. On the monitor, my hand lifted a second later. I waited for the lag to be consistent, for the tidy reassurance of cause the follow-up. Then the go. He'd blinked, and my hand lifted on the screen before I initiated the test. I froze like a kid who thinks maybe the T-Rex won't see them if they don't move. "Okay," I said to no one. "Okay." My voice sounded like I'd borrowed it. A laminated card was taped to the desk. "For situational awareness only. Do not use feeds to anticipate." The words read like someone had already argued about this. Under the note, a keyboard, the kind that clicks whether you want it to or not, and a joystick nipple that controlled something in small shivers. I turned it, and the camera at the end of the next aisle did a polite pan that made the world look like it was bowing. Sideways, a little break room space showed up in a quadrant. Table, chairs, vending machine with 2 rows empty, a stainless sink under a mirror that was too large for the wall. I could see the room from where I was through the glass door, and also see it on the screen, and in the 2 views the chairs were angled different ways. That happens. People sit, people get up, someone drags a chair with a boot. I told myself that and still felt the tug of the inconsistency. The mirror over the sink reflected the vending machine at an angle the camera couldn't possibly have captured. It looked a half-degree wrong, as if the glass weren't flat. I tried to calculate how much a slight bowing would distort a room, then told myself to stop because I was feeding the part of my brain that never gets full. One feed showed the vestibule. The locker keys hung undisturbed. Another showed a side of the building I hadn't seen. The loading doors closed like sleeping eyes. Bottom right, a view of the aisle with the cage labeled C7. The chain was still, the tag drooped, the light felt like you get when a storm is going to happen but hasn't yet found its mouth. A little thermal camera icon sat in the corner of the C7 feed, grayed out, some leftover feature. My fingers traders moved the joystick toward it. The icon brightened and the screen went from blue to black to a shimmering grayscale, heat rendering as fleeting white. The cage and the concrete came up cool and dim. The door latch was a faint warmer smear, handed recently by someone, or an artifact of metal doing what metal does. For a length of breath, nothing changed. Then a white print bloomed near the aisle's edge, the exact shape and size of a shoe's heat signature, appearing like a thought caught in the act. It faded, and another flared halfway to the cage, then another, closer. Each one held, then softened, as if the warmth were sinking into the floor. "I'm seeing ghosts," I said, which is something only a tired person says when they want to be cute instead of honest. The prince reached the cage and stopped. The latch's white grew brighter and then leveled, as if someone's hand had lingered. The screen showed no body, no suggestion of one, just the processional evidence of a walk the air hadn't bothered to register. A tiny mechanical part of me counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I didn't know why the number mattered until I remembered the knock instruction on the entry sheet. Wait 3 minutes, then knock 5 times. The mind will tie anything to keep from floating. The intercom did its 3 clicks while I was still watching the thermal feed hold the warmth of footsteps against the cooling floor. In security, the sound seemed to come from the wiring, not a single speaker. "My name," the room said again, and I hated the way my name fit in the building's mouth. My response felt thinner than before. "Inventory audit in progress." The thermal printer on the security desk, a twin to the one at Station B, woke and pushed out a steer. EP that bumped against the metal lip. "Acknowledged. Return to Station B." I didn't move. It felt like being dismissed from a place that hadn't invited me in. The break room door stood half open down the hall. I could see the mirror over the sink from here, the stainless edge of it too tall and too wide for the space. Something about it felt drawn. I told myself I was only going to wash my hands, ground the nervous electricity with tap water. I walked the few steps and stood in front of the sink and saw myself in the mirror, and had that common quiet shiver you get when a version of you don't normally stare at stares back. In the glass, my jacket was zipped. On my body, it wasn't. It's such a small trick, and there are explanations that can be assembled. A second mirror behind me somehow. A delay, a screen pretending to be a mirror. I felt for the zipper without looking down. My fingers found the clunky metal at mid-chest where I'd left it open, and in the glass I watched my reflected hand hesitate at my collar, then slide down to meet mine a fraction too late. Not far, just enough to let my stomach find the elevator it rides when I step off a curb I didn't see. I lifted my right hand. My reflection lifted its left, but a heartbeat early, like the mirror was a smug friend finishing my sentences. Behind me, behind the me in the glass, the break room had a chair turned inward toward the table. Behind my actual body, the chair was angled toward the door. I turned slowly to check, as if moving fast would upset some balance. When I faced the room, the chair was as I'd been seeing it with my eyes, angled toward the door for an easy exit. When I looked back at the mirror, I was already turned. My body and its reflection couldn't agree on when we were... I said the phrase again because apparently that's what I do when my brain lurches. "Inventory audit in progress." No intercom answer. The faucet ran too long because I was listening for a correction and forgot that water doesn't turn itself off. I dried my hands on my jacket, stupid, then on a paper towel from a dispenser that wheezed and gave up, then snapped because I pulled too hard. I dropped the little tail of paper into the trash and felt suddenly vividly ridiculous. A person in a perfectly ordinary building making shapes of fear out of angles and clocks. Back in security, the thermal feed of C7 had returned to normal color. The white prints were gone, which is how thermals work and also how nightmares do. The Station B feed showed my little square of desk with the scanner at rest like a hand folded on itself. The timestamp there read 22:13. The clock on the security wall, a big face with numbers like a schoolroom, had its second hand frozen on mirrored 17. I tried not to laugh. The kind of laugh you do in a church when you can't. The printer rattled again and pushed out a new strip. "You are out of station," it told me. The period landed like a small hammer. Another followed on its heels. "Return to Station B." No please, no because, just the insistence that direction is its own justification. Something about the combination of the mirror and the thermal prints and the contradictions built a pressure behind my eyes. I fixed on a small thing to give it somewhere to go. The bottom bezel of the monitor above the C7 feed had a hairline crack. It had been there longer than me. It would be there when I left. I breathed into that thought. As I turned to go, one of the feeds, bottom left, aiming down my aisle, showed me standing at Station B and lifting the scanner. Impossible. I watched myself lift the scanner for a second and then reach to my right without looking, the way you do when you know where the tape roll is. The me in the camera did it before I took the first step back into the hall. When I finally moved, the me on the screen stood very still and seemed to be waiting. The delay had reversed again, or I had. I looked for a timestamp to map it to and found none. The numerals had gone blank. It should be illegal, I thought, for numbers to refuse me. I walked back down the hall as if a line had been drawn and I'd been told not to scuff it. I could feel the room with the mirror at my back, a tiny magnet tug at the middle of my shoulder blades. The air in the aisle felt more viscous, like the building had thickened while I was gone. C7 waited to the side, cage wires the color of lint, chain asleep. I didn't turn my head. I saw it anyway, the way you can see the outline of a window with your eyes shut because the gray is different. At Station B, everything was exactly as I'd left it, and subtly not. The scanner coil lay in a different lazy loop, which I told myself couldn't be true because I hadn't looked closely enough to remember how it had been. A fresh thermal strip lay on the desk. I wouldn't have left that. I didn't want to read it, and I read it immediately. Remain at Station B. It duplicated the second strip from security, as if the building needed to make sure every room had said its piece. I scanned because scanning was the thing I could do. The beep settled me until it didn't. For each barcode, a tinderbox flicker in my chest went out and then lit again. If you asked me to name the emotion, I would have called it embarrassment, not fear, though fear sat right behind it. Embarrassment at being a person who needed a rule and a beep and a label to structure my breath. There are worse shames. I let this one sit. My brain tried to tidy the mess into something with edges. The mirror is a screen with a lag. The thermal mode, it says OS. As a training feature someone forgot to turn off. The feeds are run off cheap DVRs that have a bad time source and skip. The timestamps belong to their own clocks. Someone pranked the system to ripple images ahead to keep operators awake. The intercom doesn't use a speaker. It uses the building's bones, and that's why it sounds like the lights are talking. The fact that my name fits into it is a math problem. The portal made me say my name. The system recorded my name. Everything else is call and response. You can survive a lot if you give it a formula. Except there was the other thing, the thing that sat under the rationalization like a pet curled under a bed, the feeling that my choices had been narrowed in advance, the email with the exact time, the envelopes with exact amounts, the rules with exact phrases, the monitors with near exact me's, the mirror with a version of my jacket zipped when I hadn't zipped it yet. It made the room feel like a place I was being fitted to, rather than a place I was working in. I slid the new strips into the composition notebook, which was starting to feel like an organ I was carrying outside my body. On the next grid page, the hard-pressed handwriting ghosted through again from whoever had used it before me. This time the fragments read less like a command and more like a confession. Don't look at mirror when they're on. The plural stood up in my head. They who? The cameras? The lights? The voices living in the wire? I allowed myself one glance towards C7, a cutting of my eyes more than a turn of my head. Nothing. Air, metal, chain, paper tag. The longer you look at a cage, the more likely you are to invent its animal. I lowered my gaze back to the labels I could understand. 10 of 10, 5 of 5, 0 variance, order inside a border. When the intercom didn't click again right away, the quiet settled back in and showed me its seams. I could hear the transformer whine. The sound of air moving at a speed you cannot see, the faint tick of a clock that on the wall face looked paralyzed. My hands had the faint smell of the break room soap, which claimed to be orange but faded to a hospital lemon once it dried. I took a sip from the fountain and the water made the inside of my face feel colder than it should. You can tell yourself your fine and soft voices and still feel your body push its hands out against the edges of you like it wants more room. I kept scanning. I practiced the phrase in my head so I wouldn't need to put it in the air again. The printer under the desk purred now and then as if it were dreaming. This is the part that stayed with me long after. Not the mirror, not the prints, not even the me on screen moving before I did. It was the feeling that somebody, somewhere, would call what was happening a minor anomaly and write a line in a log that read, "Operator continued task," and that this would be counted as success. I wanted there to be a person on the other side of the intercom who would ask me if I was okay and mean it. Instead, there was a phrase I could say that turned scary things into instructions. Instead, there was the waiting. And the sense, small but growing, that whatever made this place function, liked time better when it ran a little ahead of me. I'd settled back into the rhythm, the way you settle into a seat that doesn't fit you but will do for the ride. Scan, beep, confirm. Tuck the slips into the notebook like hedge-pressed leaves. The intercom had been quiet long enough that my nervous system had sagged a little, like a dog that realizes the thunder might be over. I had the next box in my hands when the thermal printer under the desk kicked awake and ripped a strip against its metal tooth. Directive: move duffel from C7 to loading 2. Do not open. Acknowledge with tap. There was a soft square outlined on the strip where, if this were a phone, I'd tap. I looked around for the joke, then realized the keycard reader on the monitor base was blinking a thin, pale light. I tapped the badge. The strip chirped in the small waypaper can, and another sliver spit out. Acknowledged. Proceed now. Every instruction I'd been fed until then had politely braided itself around the rules posted at Station B. This one cut through. Do not enter C7, and now, go into C7. It should have been comforting to have an explicit override to have the decision handed to me. It wasn't. It felt like being invited to step into a square of light you'd been told never to enter, and then being watched as you did. I walked to security as if there were an adult there who could write me a hall pass. The room met me with its tired electronic smell and the wall of screens. Bottom right held the feed on C7, the chain in its lazy drape. A new strip sat on the security desk like the room had anticipated me. Override, C7 for transfer only. Keycard will operate lock. Do not open duffel. The capitalization was a tone I heard in my teeth. The intercom clicked. 1, 2, 3. My name. The voice was flatter than before, as if my name had been ironed. Inventory audit in progress, I said, because muscle memory lifts phrases faster than the mind vetoes them. The printer answered with a line that didn't help. Proceed. Timer begins. I didn't see a timer until I noticed the corner of the monitor where the C7 feed lived had gained a small overlay. T0917, ticking down. 9 minutes, 17 seconds. Of course. The numbers had come back to their favorite shape. The counting felt like a hand at the base of my neck, pressing me into motion. Back in the aisle, I understood why people in movies narrate themselves when they're alone. Saying I'm going to get the duffel felt like stringing a thread between me and something that wasn't interested in catching me. I glanced at the rule sheet again, typed letters like little stubborn soldiers, and found no relief in, if printer issues you a directive, comply promptly. The posted do not enter C7 and the slick override paper didn't argue with each other. They leaned together in my head and made a point. These rules are only rules until the room thinks of a new one. I checked my gloves because doing something with my hands helps when my brain is forked. The nitrile pair I'd brought were fine for dust and tape, but would slick if there was any kind of spill. There was a box of heavier-duty gloves on a lower shelf by the station, half open, a size too big. I slid them on over my own, double-layered. The seams bunched against my knuckles, reminding me of the hands inside my hands. The corridor to C7 felt longer than I remembered. The floor paint singing a little under my shoes, past the lazy out-of-service phone, past a stack of shrink-wrapped skids labeled with city names that meant nothing to me. The cage waited the way furniture waits. Not menacing, not friendly, simply present. The chain through the latch looked more like theater than security up close. A small square of plastic sat near the hasp, flush with the metal, easy to miss. I palmed my keycard to it. It hummed a polite assent. The chain slipped loose with a sound that had more voice in it than I expected. Little links whispering against each other as if they were passing a rumor. Inside C7, the air dropped a degree like someone had just opened a freezer across the room and closed it again. The duffel was black and businesslike, ballistic nylon scuffed in a way that told you it had been introduced to a lot of concrete floors. 2 end handles, 1 shoulder strap, each with reinforced stitching that made X's like saltine crackers. There was a neon zip tie cinched through the zipper pulls, fluoro green, a color that wants to be obeyed. A paper tag hung from a paracord loop at one end. Loading 2 transfer. Under that, in smaller print, do not open. It had the same tone as the strip from the printer, but paper can't really be stern. It can only suggest you decide to hear it that way. I put a hand to the bag. The nylon was the kind of cold you get in a room where the air is moving, but the objects haven't woken up yet. Under that, warmth. Not even patchy, like the heat of something with corners, something that had been set down and forgotten for the length of a smoke break. My hand skated over a slick spot near a seam, It wasn't wet exactly. It was the kind of tack a dry wipe gives a table after too much disinfectant. The smell found me in stages, like a person stepping into the doorway. Antiseptic first, the chemical lemon you get in a medical waiting room, then something behind it I wanted not to name. Pennies on a tongue, a new copper pipe, the iron note that lives in the word blood without anyone having to say it. I staged breathing like I was lowering myself into a cold pool. In through the nose, out through the mouth. A trick I stole from a therapist I stopped seeing because we both got tired of watching me do the easy exercises and call it change. The timer in the corner of the C7 feed had slipped under 9 minutes. 8-something. I didn't need the number. I could feel what it was doing to my nerves. There was a utility cart parked just beside. Yawned the cage, low and flat with a rubberized mat, one wheel that knocked in a loop like a shoulder that needed to be set. I dragged it closer. The squeak of the bearing made my neck tighten. I slid the bag to the edge of the shelf because lifting from your body is smarter than lifting from your shoulders, and I try to keep promises to my spine. The bag followed my hands like it had opinions about friction. When I tipped it and took weight, the first shock went through my arms, a heaviness that didn't match its size. Not industrial machinery heavy, not impossible, but enough to make my teeth know about it. The weight wasn't even. Whatever was inside shifted late, an afterthought correction, and landed against the nylon with a soft thud that traveled into my palms. I let it down onto the cart more ungently than I meant to, which felt like an apology I had no body to give it to. The neon zip tie flashed at me. There was a small smear near the knot where it bit the pulls. Brown under fluorescent, almost purple at the edges. Too little to be anything if you choose to be merciful. The antiseptic underlayer in the air got stronger when the bag moved, stirred from wherever it had settled. I thought of cold packs, the blue gel kind they keep in gym freezers for ankle sprains, and fastened my mind to that. A bag with cold packs sweating in a warm room. The copper was a phantom. People bring smells with them. Buildings remember. As I turned the cart, the phone at the end of the aisle let out a single clipped ring. The old kitchen bell tone cut off mid-arc, the sound of a thought that didn't finish. I kept my eyes on the path I'd measured between my feet and the floor line. The intercom did its click, click, click. My name. The voice had found a little softness around the consonants, not kind, just practiced. Inventory audit in progress, I said, and I hate that I said it, but it's what the room wants. The printer at my station spit a strip that I didn't stop to read. The cartwheel with the knock found a frequency that matched my heart. I moved the bag. It wasn't far to loading 2, past the vestibule door, past the break room that was so confident in its mirror it didn't need my face, past a column that had caution tape around its ankle like a sock. The loading bay door was shut, the kind with the thick horizontal seams that roll up like a tongue. A halo light over loading 2 glowed a weak green that suggested the door had a good opinion of me. The floor in front of it wore the marks of pallet jacks and boot heels, readable like stories if you're generous. I set the duffel down on the mat where a box's outline had been worn into the rubber. The cart sighed. My gloves made a sound against the nylon like teeth rubbing velvet. I tugged the bag into the center of the mat because my body wants symmetry when my head is at sea. The timer in my periphery clung to its favorite numbers. 8-something brought low. The small overlay ticked. I resisted the urge to turn the bag so that its tag read upright to the camera, then did it anyway. It cost me nothing to be neat. There was no chime of completion, no small noise of a task done. The intercom didn't bless me or grade me. The phone didn't ring. The building took my action and made it part of itself. I stood there with my hands still in the air in the shape of the weight I'd just put down and waited to feel something uncomplicated. Pride for finishing, relief that I didn't drop it, anger at being made to do a job in a way that made me into a hand. None of those arrived. What I felt instead was the thing you get in a dream where you're following instructions, but the instructions keep slipping from noun to verb while you're reading them. The timer in the security feed, because I had angled the cart to see it without turning my head, rolled to T00, then blinked out, then came back with logged. The printer at Station B finally made its paper noise. I went back. For it in that weird floaty walk you do when your body wants to run and you tell it you need to be normal. The strip read, transfer received, continue Station B, custodian, my name. The word custodian hung in my head like a medal and then turned into a weight. I imagined someone somewhere tabbing a spreadsheet. Column for tasks, column for who carried the bag. I imagined my name against a row that had existed before me and would exist after me, changed out like a new string through the zipper pulls. I peeled off the top set of gloves and then the second pair. The outer gloves had picked up the antiseptic tang. Under it, a small, dull metallic note clung to my fingers through the nitrile. I scrubbed the smell off in the break room sink against that awful orange, not orange soap. It turned my hands into a squeak that felt like embarrassment. The mirror did what it does. It returned me in a way that didn't quite reconcile with the present. I watched my mouth move a half beat after I moved it, and didn't love what the delay did to a person shaped like me. "Inventory audit in progress," I mouthed without saying it, and the reflection mouthed it too, its lips a fraction late, like a choir member who missed the cue and is trying to catch up. Back at Station B, the scanner did the only thing it knows how to do, be sure in a world where I wasn't. I picked it up and let its little sharp bird tone answer questions I couldn't. The composition notebook took the new strip. On the page beneath the last ghost-hard inscription from whoever was before me, there was another faint pressure bleed, just 2 words this time, angled like the hand that wrote them, didn't want them to be caught fully. It moved. The words crawled under my skin and perched. It could mean the same thing I'd felt, a shift against weight. It could be a sentence about anything, the part of me that likes tidy and... Ding punctuation put a period after it in my head to keep it from growing roots. It moved. I tried to rationalize again with fresh materials. The smell, cleaning agent on old nylon, cold packs breaking sweat, the coin note of copper, from metal rubbing, from the chain, from my own dumb mind manufacturing drama. The weight, batteries, small motors, a piece of equipment wrapped for transport, the warmth, friction, insulation, my hands through the gloves, the slick patch, sanitizer, a leak from a bottle of something harmless, the tag. Any warehouse has transfer tags for in-house moves. The timer, training feature, the fact that the override contradicted the posted rule, a test, a way to ensure people can follow dynamic instructions, the word custodian, some ops person's idea of a title. You stack the reasonable, and it makes a small wall you can lean against. It doesn't keep rain off. The phone rang once, and I didn't look at it. The intercom clicked and didn't say my name, then clicked again and did. It felt like the difference between being seen and being counted. I answered with the phrase and hated myself for how that made everything smoother in the space. The printer woke and told me what it tells me when I do as I'm told. Acknowledged. I couldn't stop glancing toward the loading bay. There was no direct line of sight from Station B, but my body kept checking like it had a hunch that distance doesn't mean anything when the building wants to be a single room. I found myself making a mental map of exits I had seen and haven't. The break room door to the hall, the vestibule, the side door with the keypad, the loading doors which likely needed an inside knowledge I didn't have. I pictured the duffel sitting on the rubber mat beneath the halo light, a warm oblong shape settling into the floor. If it had needed to go anywhere else, I told myself, the room would have told me so. I picked up a box and my hands shook the way they do when coffee is a religion. I set it down and waited for my nervous system to reinterpret itself as a body. The scanner made its little insistence. The terminal rewarded me with confirmation. 0 variance, it said, and for a second in my chest, I believed it. Then I looked down at the composition book, the strips like thin commandments, the ghost of someone else's pressure writing, and saw that even here, in the part of the task that should have been a fence around my head, there were imprints I hadn't made. Evidence of a person I couldn't name insisting to themselves not to answer, not to look, not to ask. The words did not make me feel accompanied. They made me feel like a shoreline someone had written warnings on because the tide makes fools of distances. I am not proud of this, but I thought, clearly and without metaphors, about the envelope in my jacket from the vestibule and the rest of the number that hadn't been paid yet. I thought about the pale envelopes with red windows at home. I thought about how I was letting a building tell me how to be a person. Then I reminded myself I had always let buildings tell me who to be. We all do. Hospitals with their beeps, courthouses with their certain shoes, offices with their carpet hush, schools with their bells. Maybe this one was just more honest about it. The next strip that printed didn't ask me to do anything. It simply said, "Continue until relieved." Relieved is a kinder word than dismissed. It makes you feel like there's a weight that will be lifted, not just a job that ends. I stood there and waited for my heart to frame that correctly. It didn't. It loped in place, animal fast, as if it could smell something I couldn't. Out by the loading bay, settling, cooling, en route to a door I hadn't yet had to open. For a while after the duffel, I anchored myself to the tiny logic of the scanner. Beep equals match, match equals done. The printer under the desk seemed to nap with one ear open. Continue until relieved, it had said, and I tried to inhabit the word as if it had warmth in it. The aisles had taken back their quiet hum. I put a small stack of empty slips in the top corner of the desk and felt better for having made a neat little square of nothing. The first hint something had shifted was a sound I didn't recognize yet, a soft bird peep from somewhere behind me, not the scanner's note, not the intercom. The monitor at Station B flickered in the corner of my eye, and for a second showed the badge icon with my name under it. Access, East Stair. The badge had pinged somewhere I wasn't. It went away so fast I could have blamed a blink. A second later, the security printer, back in the room with the screens, kicked out a strip. I didn't go to it. The strip at my station followed a breath later, like an echo. Movement logged, East Stair. Operator, my name. Remain at Station B. The words were so calm you could mistake them for reassurance. They were not. They read like someone telling you where your shadow had gotten to while you were tying your shoe. I glanced down the aisle toward security. The door was shut. The bell over the push bar held its still, heavy peace. On the wall monitor at Station B, the smaller one that showed a rotating grid of feeds like a set of lungs, an angle of the East Stair popped into one quadrant. Stairs painted a hospital gray, landings with the same red line I was learning to obey. In the frame, a figure moved down a landing I hadn't stood on, in a jacket I recognized before I recognized its wearer. Mine. The notch in the cuff seam where a thread popped 2 winters ago. The smudge from the break room soap I'd wiped off badly, still damp, a darker arc known. Ear the pocket. The me on the screen, if it was me, had zipped the jacket up clean to the throat. The zipper tab lay to one side in the way mine never does unless I remember to set it there. I did not remember. I watched the figure pause at the landing, fingers on the rail, then turn as if listening to something. The timestamp beneath the feed said 22:34. The clock at the corner of my own terminal said 22:30. I told myself that clocks disagree and rooms lag, and someone in a control booth somewhere had queued up a past segment or a training overlay or anything but a live me. The scanner in my hand felt stupid and good. I scanned a code very carefully, as if precision could demagnetize whatever the cameras had entered into the record. Beep, match, 0 variance. My breath found a rhythm, but my eyes kept skittering back to the rotating grid. The figure in my jacket moved again, now an angle I knew only because of the floor map. Side D hallway, where I had not been. The badge icon blinked at the bottom of the quadrant. Access granted. Side D, ID, last 4. Confidence, 1 of 1. The words turned the inside of my mouth dry. I told myself a kinder story. There's someone else on shift. They overissue jackets. Or they bought a lot of jackets from the same sale I did. The seam notch is a coincidence, the soap mark is a smear on the lens, the way the body moves, shoulders in the shape of mine, is a function of the fact that buildings breed similar gaits. People who spend nights in fluorescent hallways learn to carry themselves a certain way. I fed the story to the part of me that wanted to be soothed, and that part took the story and nodded and swallowed and still stared. The printer spoke again. Manifest queued. No instruction attached, no address. A second later, from somewhere deeper in the building, past the loading doors, past the phantom air, a different printer answered. With a long mechanical unspooling, the kind you hear from shipping stations when they spit half a yard of stickers, I didn't move toward it. The intercom clicked its metronome. Tick, tick, tick. My name, said the lights. Inventory audit in progress, I said, because there are muscles you can only unlearn slowly. The East Air feed put the figure into another frame. This time the jacket was open. It shouldn't matter. People zip, unzip, adjust. On screen, the shoulder slope was mine, precise in a way coincidence doesn't usually achieve. Down the hall, the security room door stayed closed like a mouth. Somewhere outside, faint and not urgent yet, a siren tried to be a straight line and failed. The air in the building held it like a coin under a napkin. Present, muffled, suggestive. I told myself it belonged to a different story on a different street because that's what you have to tell yourself if you want to stay the shape you are in a space that keeps rearranging you. The siren found a friend, and then the two of them let each other fade. I had the tonic relief of their leaving and then weirdly missed them immediately, the way you miss a noise that proves the world is still happening outside your head. The monitors had rotated to a view of the loading bay. For a second I thought I saw the line of the duffel's shadow on the rubber mat. Maybe that's memory. Maybe that's how shadows work when you're primed. The security printer coughed out another strip. I forced myself to go collect it because avoiding paper hadn't helped me. The room took me in the way a refrigerator does when you open it too often and it doesn't have what you want. On the desk, 3 strips sat in a fan where they'd fallen. Access event, 22:34:17. Door, side D, ID, last 4. Result, granted. Access event, 22:34:34. Door, East Stair, ID, last 4. Result, granted. Manifest, outbound. Load. Ref. L0317. Custodian. My name. Status. Queued. The word outbound tapped a small hammer on my ribs. It's a common word in warehouses. It shouldn't do anything dramatic to a person. It did to me. I put the strips in the notebook under the previous ones and felt like I was tucking leaves into a book no one would ever read. On the wall, the bottom left feed that usually watched the aisle near Station B now showed the waist-high angle of a badge reader close to a push bar. A hand approached it. My gloves, that double layer, the outer pair a size too big. The reader chirped green. The hand pressed the bar. The camera had a warping lens. The arm looked longer than it should be. When the door edged open, the camera caught the sliver of my jacket sleeve, and beyond it, a slice of concrete so pale it could have been daylight or a refrigeration unit's belly. I wasn't there. I told myself I wasn't there. That sentence didn't act the way denial is supposed to act. A smaller speaker I hadn't noticed on the security desk woke with a hiss. It was not the intercom. It was an old radio clipped on its stand, the kind with a rubber duck antenna and a battery that had learned the shape of this room. Dispatch to Unit 12, a voice said through a fan of static. Caller reports movement at address. Signal initiated by anonymous email. Caller states, East Side distribution after hours, unauthorized. The address was not the building's outgoing mail, but it was the kind of address that narrows a city to a corner in your chest. The numbers were exact enough to set a floor plan in my head. The voice continued on the radio, flat and helpful. Unit 12 copies. There was a second voice somewhere else I couldn't hear. The siren that had left found itself again, nearer this time, then softened like a hand on a bruise. The printer beside the radio pushed out another strip. Calm as a teacher. If approached by third parties, respond with phrase and return to task. Next strip before I could slide it to bed. Remain at Station B. The word remain had a slight lift in it, like a parent trying to keep a kid from wandering into traffic. I don't know that the building cared whether I came to harm or whether I was in place for naming and logging, but the effect was roughly the same. Do not leave. Do not change shape. On the monitors, the me in my jacket moved through a hallway I hadn't been down yet. Paint worn thinner in the center of the floor, exit signs with a lazy heartbeat flicker. The camera caught the side of a head as the figure turned slightly, and every line was familiar in the way mirrors make your face familiar only when you're expecting it. The collar on the jacket was turned down. Mine, in this room, brushed the base of my neck. I reached back without looking and felt the cloth and could not prove anything to myself with my hand. Another printer in the building, this one out by the loading bay, started its long task sound, the one that unspools labels like a song. I was sure, without hearing the words, that those labels had my name in the slot beneath custodian. The way you're sure your own phone is ringing in a room full of identical rings. The radio coughed again. Check also the back lot. White SUV parked across from the access road, lights off. Caller reports vehicle present prior nights. The voice did not assign meaning. It just placed facts on a table. The white SUV wasn't in the monitor feeds, which I told myself meant the cameras didn't cover that view, not that the SUV didn't exist. My brain kept trying to solve for who the caller was, if caller meant coincidence or system, if anonymous meant neighbor or design. The intercom found its clicks, steady, the way you wake. Up and check the time without moving your full body. My name, it said. Inventory audit in progress, I gave it back. The printer in security answered at once. Acknowledged. Do not answer wall phone. No one had called since the clipped ring in the heavy bag stretch. The wall phone, on cue, rang once as if to play its part. Not a proper ring. Half of one, cut like breath held too long. I stepped back from the desk and let my heels find the line they'd drawn in my head. The me in the jacket on the monitors moved closer to loading too. At the edge of frame, the duffel's tag flashed its "Do not open" with an innocence I found offensive. I stood there with my name in the radio's mouth, custodian, and my name in the intercom's mouth, operator, and my name under the badge icon's mouth, one of one, and I could not articulate which version of me the building was most interested in keeping. There's a particular tired that turns decisions into paper. You can fold them, you can tear them, they feel crisp and hollow at the same time. I went back to Station B because the strips told me to and because it was a smaller circle inside a larger one I couldn't see the edges of. The scanner's beep tried to become a metronome for my blood. It failed. My hands made soft misfires on the boxes I lifted because a part of me was holding a second job, listening for wheels, for boots, for keys. The composition book took the new strips. Under the page where "it moved" had bled through, another set of hard-pressed ghosts hid in the grid. My brain played the usual guessing game. Don't. Custod. Name. I didn't try to solve the fragments into a sentence because the sentences I was making without their help were bad enough. The book wasn't a palimpsest, it was an argument with time. Through the coolant blue of the monitor, the me on the hallway feed dipped out of frame. The next camera picked me up again near a roll-up door with a corrugation so familiar it might as well have been a fingerprint. The jacket was zipped, then unzipped between frames as if a camera had skipped. When the figure turned its head past a camera and didn't give me a face, I felt something mean and human rise in me. The ugly wish to see proof. The desire to have to forgive a real person instead of a system. It's easier to call a person cruel than an algorithm indifferent. The radio uttered again. Advise. Address on file is the building's numbers. Caller describes interior lights active. The number was exact in a way that found the muscle at the back of my throat and squeezed. The intercom did not acknowledge the radio. The building spoke with its own vocabulary. I waited for the 3 clicks that mean I would be given a job. They came late, then early, then not at all. Small stutters that made me feel like I was supposed to be grateful when it landed on the pattern I knew. Inventory audit in progress, I said to the empty air before anyone asked, because that's what happens when you train a mouth. The printer rewarded me with acknowledged, which is the worst word for a human wanting comfort. It's a receipt with no thank you attached. I considered leaving. The idea was a block of ice in the room, clean-edged, cold, impossible to ignore. If I walked to the vestibule, took my phone from the little numbered locker, turned it on, texted Mara the PIN and the word home, would that rewind me? The thought didn't feel like an exit. It felt like tricking a maze by drawing a door where a wall is. The posted rule about third parties, the scripted line about what to say, the timer that belonged to its own logic. They organized themselves around the exit in my head and tightened. If I met whoever the radio belonged to in the lot, what would I say besides the line the building had taught me? And if my voice had already been put in the ceiling, how would I prove that any noise I made originated from me? Rationalization is a narcotic that wears off fast, but I took another hit. The figure in the jacket is an overlay, a training reel. The access strips are tests that want me to notice the contradiction and pass by, not reacting. The radio is an unrelated call. The sirens belong to someone else's hurt. The manifests that say custodian, my name, are auto-filled fields that set default to the only operator on the schedule. The white SUV is a car from a family visiting a night shift worker at the fencing supply that shares a fence with this place. The clock stuck at 17 is a broken clock, which is the most ordinary kind. I built the fort and sat in it. The ceiling felt lower inside. The wall phone rang again, longer this time, then stopped in the middle like someone had lifted a finger off a record. I didn't look. My chest did that small readiness something, broadening breath, a tiny heroic stupidity. The intercom, absent for a minute, clicked 3 times and put my name in my ears like I'd dropped it and it was handing it back. I answered, "Inventory audit in progress." It's almost funny how quickly a sentence like that starts to taste like obedience. Back on the monitors, the me at the roll-up door, loading 2, stood next to the duffel as if to show scale. It's what you do when you want to convince someone a thing is as large as you say. The label printer out by the bay sang out a last few inches of paper and fell quiet, as if tired. A shadow of movement touched the bottom edge of the frame. Car lights, I thought, washing across the threshold from the seam under the door. Or a wrong reflection, or the part of my brain that won't stop adding motion with. There isn't any... I have to be honest, I wanted a person, not a figure on a screen, not my name on a strip, not a voice that says acknowledged. A person with a face who would either cash me out and send me home with a handshake or tell me that we'd be sitting tight while the radio voices came and we would explain the normalcy of counting boxes at night. Even being yelled at would have passed for care. The building offered me none of that. It offered me a script, a set of coordinates, a series of times, and the illusion that my compliance made the quiet purposeful. Somewhere outside, a siren and a siren agreed to be a chorus for a moment and then lost their courage. In here, the fluorescent lights sang to themselves in a tone just at the edge of my hearing, and a piece of me began to hope. Not that this would end, but that it would pause, and that the pause would feel like relief instead of a new rule. I didn't get that. The printer under the desk nudged out one more strip. "Prepare for handoff," it said. "Do not initiate." The words had all the information in the world and none. I put the strip in the notebook like a person setting aside a note for a version of themselves who can make sense of it later. Then I stood where the building told me to stand and waited to be used. Handoff would have been a harmless word anywhere else. Here it didn't mean transfer, it meant being placed. The strip didn't add an object, handoff of what, to whom, but the building had been making a case all night that it didn't need nouns to move me. The radio's flat voice had put numbers to the world outside. The white SUV sat in the corner of my mind like a parked thought, and the monitors kept drafting a second me in my jacket. Do not initiate, the printer had added, because even my disobedience had a place in the script. If I stayed at Station B and waited for someone to open loading 2, I would watch my name populate the line below custodian while the feed showed my jacket being exactly where it was supposed to be when the door rolled up. If I left, the strips had an answer for that too. Remain. If I met a third party, I had the phrase ready in my mouth to make me sound like a system. I wanted to take away a piece the building was playing with. I wanted to make the board ugly. I remembered a gray box on the security wall that I hadn't looked at because screens pull eyes harder than painted metal. The box was labeled LTG Zones AD on laminated tape. Beneath it, smaller panels wore labels like nerves, mech loft, E-stair, dock levelers. Someone had been careful with the type. All caps, black on white. A crescent of dirty fingerprints arced near the main handle, proof that even tidy systems need hands. The emergency protocol in the job brief had been bossy about alarms, await instructions, do not self-evacuate, but it hadn't mentioned lighting. It's childish to think omission is permission. I thought it anyway. In my head, I practiced saying it out loud to whoever might ask later. I cut lighting because I felt unsafe. It had the shape of a sentence people accept. The security room had that machine heart warmth that settles a person who prefers metal to crowds. The monitors filmed a life I wasn't living while the corner of my eye tugged me to the lock on the lighting panel. No lock. A little hasp where a lock could live. Empty. A suggestion not taken. I slid my fingers under the lip and pulled. The hinge groaned like it had opinions about theater. Inside, rows of toggles and descending columns, each with its own tape label. LTG-A, main. LTG-B, main. LTG-C, AUX. I didn't need all of them. I needed the one that would make the building forget how to see me. I stood there for a moment, palm resting on the plastic of LTG-B, main, an ordinary switch in an ordinary place, and felt the weight of making a choice in a building that had been so happy to make choices for me. The intercom did its 3 clicks, twice, like a person clearing their throat. My name, the lights said. My mouth gave back the sentence I'd been trained to give. Inventory audit in progress. I pressed the switch down. Fluorescents die like insects, a long tremor, then a scatter of afterimage. The hum that had been everywhere splintered, then gathered itself in new corners. The air handlers stayed, a low draw in the ducts, but the ceiling's hard whine slackened into background. For a heartbeat, the building felt like a lung after an asthma attack, too empty and too aware of itself. Then the emergency systems woke. Exit signs burned a calm red that painted the hallways like arteries. A pair of dock beacons near loading 2, little wheeled light circles meant to warn forklift drivers, took turns giving the bay a slow blood pulse. An inverter somewhere in the ceiling let out a steady beep 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 that I wanted to call brave and couldn't. The monitors in security went black in a soft collapse of rectangles. One came back. Not a wall screen, not the nice ones. A little camera, dime lens, battery nipple, stuck like a leech to a column above the end cap at Station B lit E. It had its own tiny green and kept watching. I hated it for having its own power more than I'd hated the big screens for their authority. The intercom did not stay dead. The 3 clicks announced themselves out of the infrastructure, not the ceiling grill. Metal bones passing sound to other metal bones. "See, my name," the building said, and my body showed me how much electricity lives in habit by preparing to answer with a sentence designed to have no edges. I didn't speak. In the quiet the words made, my breath had the sound of someone else in the room. I let the red pulses find me. The aisle that had been flat with fluorescent honesty now made shape out of shadow. Tape marks I hadn't registered earlier, thin rivers of blue along the concrete, a neat square of gaffer at knee height on a post, came forward like a developing photograph. Near Station B, 2 footprints made of white tape angled slightly outward, toes pointing toward the scanner. A rectangle of tape the length of a person's shoulder sat behind them. Beyond that, faint shapes, outlines of boxes, arcs where elbows would fall if you leaned a certain way, a circle with "stand" printed next to it in faded Sharpie. Across the floor near the loading bay, more of them, semi-permanent blocking, film set energy, except nobody bothered to wash it off because the actors don't leave. With the lights off, the duffel's outline was a deeper dark on the rubber mat, a gap cut into red as the beacons traded responsibility. If I didn't know it was fabric, I could have called it a hole. The little battery camera's lens caught a sliver of that and held it. I could see its LED reflected in the curve of the duffel like a star caught in a bucket. The wall phone rang once like a memory, and then refused to either perform or end the joke. It didn't need building power to startle me. The line has its own philosophy of current. Somewhere in the ceiling, a relay clicked like a small animal testing a trap. The radio on the security desk hissed and then shut itself into a core, near of its battery, conserving. Emergency light changes scale. The warehouse didn't feel big and red. It felt specific. Each taped silhouette read as an instruction that had outlived the person who'd been given it. A long taped trapezoid near C7 had a number at one end, S3, half peeled, half stubborn. Someone had labeled a standing place, and someone else had stood there long enough to make the tape dirty with their shoes. Near the break room, a little waist-high X on the wall lined up with a spot on the floor where, if I put my feet on the prints and lifted my chin, I could put my face into the mirror without touching it. I didn't try it. I knew I'd see a version of me arrive in the glass a fraction of a moment before I did. Inventory? The intercom began and cut the word in two. The system wasn't built for being dark. It was using muscles it didn't practice. A printer somewhere tried to feed paper without power and produced a sound like a cough. In the strobing wash from the dock beacons, a stripe of reflective tape I hadn't noticed on the floor made itself known. Chevrons pointing from the vestibule to Station B, then from Station B to C7, then from C7 to Loading 2. Lanes. They'd taught me to walk along them all night without saying that's what they were. I stepped out of the chevrons like leaving a church pew into the aisle. My flashlight, heavy in my pocket, was allowed. Bring your own, the brief had said, and I used it, but sparingly. In the finger-width beam, the tape read as scuffed and greasy, the kind of grime that never fully leaves concrete. The flashlight made dust motes into actors and convinced me the air was busier than it was. When I lowered the light, the red made everything honest again. The taped outlines were less like chalk and more like memory. Someone had told people to stand here. When I looked where here was, each spot had a sightline, cam, era, phone, intercom, door. My body responded to the darkness by becoming larger. Every sense leaned 2 degrees forward as if I could catch the building in the act if I gave it the extra half step. Fear, when it's useful, organizes. When it isn't, it rehearses. I stood with my toes just behind the white tape footprints at Station B and did not put my feet inside them because I didn't want the encouragement. The little battery camera's green light ticked at the edge of my vision, and I couldn't tell if what I hated more was knowing it saw me or suspecting it would see me better if I stepped exactly where I was meant to. The intercom's 3 clicks didn't stop, but they lost their certainties. Sometimes the pauses were wrong. Sometimes they arrived with halves of words still in their mouths. The first syllable of my name came, and then the second syllable took its time, as if it had to remember how to be a sound. I said nothing. The strip printer struggled once and fell into silence. The radio warmed and cooled like the sea against a wall. I went to security because the room still felt like a place where switches were truer than voices. The monitors were deeper black than the rest of the dark, as if they knew how to absorb. Only the little camera survived, its cheap field of view a conspiracy of angles. On the desk under my palm, the metal was a degree warmer than the air, the way things get when they've worked too hard for too long. I opened the notebook because writing is an honest muscle. In the red wash, my pen looked like a small organ, the ink a stain. My handwriting wobbled as if the building had sneaked instructions into my hand. LTGB off, I wrote. Battery cam alive. Tape footprints. S3 near C7. I consider stepping into S3. I do not. Rationalization tried its way back in, smaller and more polite. Lights out equals safety in some places, active shooter drills, emergency procedures. I had cut light to reduce my own visibility to whoever might be watching from outside the glass. Lights out made me less interesting to a white SUV with someone behind its wheel and to a radio that delivered numbers like weather. The taped shapes were normal. Film crews, safety training, floor meetings. Warehouses do gather people and tell them where to stand. The camera that stayed on was a safety upgrade. The intercom swallowing syllables was a system doing its best. The duffel on the mat was any bag, in any night, between any doors. I made the case. Part of me sat and nodded. The rest of me counted beats. I had a thought I didn't enjoy. The building didn't need the bright light to do what it was doing. It needed me to accept the shape it drew for me. The brightness had made it easy to read the lines. The red made them holy. My jacket felt heavier when I noticed how precisely the taped shoulders matched my width. That's the kind of thing you can make up. It's also the kind of thing that can be true without being important. I gave myself permission to not decide which it was tonight. I went to the vestibule and used the key to open the small locker, because the phone in the dark felt like the less dangerous lie. My fingers found it with that blind relief you pretend not to need. I didn't turn it on. Holding it was enough to reverse engineer a little control from the dark. The exit door with alarm will sound if opened wore its big bell like a threat. With the lights off, it didn't look like a warning, so much as a dare. I pressed the push bar a fraction, just enough to feel the cold seam and the slight reddening of the emergency light outside through the crack. The bell didn't sound. The battery somewhere chose to be generous or had already given what it had to give. I let the bar back. The temptation to draw the new door in the wall stayed a solid block in my chest. On my way back to Station B, I noticed a tape outline I'd missed. Thin, wrist's width, inside the taped footprint box. 2 parallel lines where hands would rest if you were told to stay still. Next to it, in Sharpie, someone had written, "Hold." The O had been gone over twice, harder, as if the pen had needed the letter to mean more than it could. I don't know why that was the one that took the breath out of me. Maybe because it was the first time a taped instruction had asked me to do something I couldn't fake. I stood between the prints and the word and didn't fit either exactly. The intercom found its clicks and tried my name again, and I didn't speak back. Somewhere by the dock, the beacon lights kept trading the responsibility of making the world visible. The little camera's LED held its spot like a fixed star. I thought of the phrase I would be expected to offer to anyone who came looking, "Inventory audit in progress," and understood it was less a sentence than a spell, less a description than a seal. I was not looking for a mouth to cast it at anymore. The last thing I wrote before I put the pen away: if I stand where they tell me to stand, I will become exactly the shape they need. Then, smaller, because I didn't want the words to get louder by reading them, I already am.